I hope this will help in understanding the case study. And in this particular situation, what I have in front on the screen right now in front of you is an example of what I call a cascaded style sheet or CSS external file, meaning it's a separate file. You type this in and you save it completely separately, independently from the rest of the web pages. All of them will have this form. They'll have the name of a tag like body or H1, excuse me, or H2, or the anchor tag or what have you. You can make your original names as well. You can use tag names that are not built into the HBO, into the HTML vocabulary. For example, I might have one called header. There is not a vocabulary word. There's not a tag in HTML called header. There is not a tag that is called advertisement. There is not a tag called NAV. There's not a tag called Mike Sisk. There's not a tag called Sherry. But you can invent one. If you do invent one, it will have one of two symbols in front of it. It will either have a tic-tac-toe or pound symbol, that's called an ID tag, or it will have a dot or a period, that is called a class selector or class tag. And when you save this document, you can save it as any name you want to. You just want to make sure that the ending, the three letters at the end after the dot, are .css for Cascade Style Sheet, so the computer knows what it is. So if you call this Pacific.css when you save it in Notepad, then it will be that name. Now that will only name the CSS style sheet. It cannot run by itself. It doesn't do anything. What it does, you apply this CSS style sheet to other pages. For example, if instead of having to type, let's say I had 10 web pages, and let's say all 10 web pages had blue text letters and a white background, and I had that typed in the code. If I want to change those to red letters on a green background, that's an ugly set of colors, but for the sake of this recording it's okay, I would have to change 10 web pages to make that change. Where if I would put those changes in a CSS document, I only have to change it in one place. One CSS document like this one, 10 web pages. If I apply all the elements to all 10 web pages in this one single document, it makes it easier to make the change. That way, if I wanted my H1 tags right here to be blue instead of red instead of blue, I just change it to red and will automatically apply it to the other 10 web pages. And you may be saying, well, how does it apply it to the other 10 web pages? Well, we take this name called Pacific.css, and in the regular web page right here, we use this link statement. That's the only way you can assign that CSS file to all the web pages. You tell it to link Pacific.css or whatever you name it to this particular page, and you have to have this statement in every one of your web pages if you're going to use the CSS file. Now what I did on what you sent me in Blackboard is you have to put that between the head tags, and that's why I indicate with the little arrow. You've got it there, you just have it in the wrong place. Now when you're starting to look at your directions in the book, what may help, this is where you refer to directions C, F, and G and all this. I'm going to make these a little bit larger, and hopefully this helps you out with it. So I'm going to make these a little bit bigger. And again, the trade-off on a video is I'm not with you, plus it's a matter of being able to see this also. Your keywords when you're looking at this, and I'm on, if you're looking at being a really highly visual learner, I'm on page 123 in the particular textbook that we're using right here. So on page 123, it says configure a div element. There's your keyword right there, the word div. I'm going to put it in red. Assigned to the ID named content that contains the home content area. The opening content div tag should be placed on a blank line below the closing tag for the nav div. Let's go through how all these things are working first and make sure you're okay with it. But my point here is, here are the keywords that you're looking at. Configure a span, that's a tag that contains the text. Assign this tag to the resort class. Probably what you're not understanding, my guess is maybe that you haven't read the chapter, and if you have read the chapter, maybe you haven't tried the little exercises, which I have to depend on students to do independently, even if it's a seated class. Let's go back, and now that you see those keywords, I'm going to go back to page 122 and look at this step and just see if you're understanding how these items work. What you're dealing with right here on this particular page, I'm going back to 122, and I hope I'm not confusing you with flipping back and forth right here, but what you're doing in this one, you are creating the CSS file. And what it says to do, when it uses the word global, they're just talking about the whole web page. Global, and I'm looking at page 122, I'm looking at the bullets in the middle of the page. So stop this video as you need to pause and to replay it. It says, use the body element section with background color white. And again, I'm going to put these in red just to give you these. The body element selector. Body is a vocabulary word that we use in C++, in HTML. I'm trying to do a lot of things at one time. I apologize. And with text color dark gray. Now what you're doing right here, I'm taking this, what I'm doing is I'm taking this information, I'm going to my CSS tag, and the way I do my CSS file, I go in, and let me see if I can flip this right here. It says body element, background color white, so in right here I'm putting the word body. I've got two curly braces, one that opens and one that closes. They face opposite directions. Doesn't matter whether they are below it or beside it. You're free form as far as how you type it. You don't have to be precise like you would in Java or C++. So I'm going to type in background color, and again, if you look through the book, you'll know exactly how to punctuate these. Background color, and it would be perfectly okay to put the word white. That's perfectly okay. What they did in the book is they gave you, and there's a semicolon that always follows it. Instead of putting white, what they gave you is the code for it. Now this pound symbol has nothing to do with the ID tag. It has to do with the code for doing web colors. So my background color for my body is FFFFF. And I'm going to pull these directions from the CSS file right here so you can see them. And I hope this will help you. This may make a little bit of a longer video, but hopefully this will get it across. So I'm going to move this up here where I've got the directions right here beside the word body, so you're seeing what's happening. There are the directions. I'm taking the word body, and it's right there. Background color white, and it's right here. Now it says text color dark gray. Now the word is not TEXT color. This is where I have to depend on you to do the reading, or any student for that matter. Color, and again that color just assumes text color. And you can put dark gray, I think, but they gave you the code for it, so you don't have to worry about it. You put the little pound symbol, and it just has to be a bunch of sixes. Semicolon ends it. That takes care of your global style for body. Alright? When I'm doing in the CSS file, when I'm doing, thank you for bearing with me, when I'm doing style rules for the H1 element, and I'm not going through that one, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. When it says style rules for the H11 element, or for the H1 element, I'm doing the same thing I did for body. I'm just applying whatever the directions are for H1, because that's a tag that's built into the HTML vocabulary, and you already know that. The next one says styles for an ID named nav. Again, I'm going to put this up here where you can see it. Now if it says styles for an ID named nav, the key word right here is the word ID. That means I'm going to have a pound symbol right there. I want to name it nav, so instead of putting the word header right there, I'm putting the word nav. And the ID is because of the little pound symbol right there. Now, it says configure sky blue background color. So all I have to do right here is put background color. Again, I'm reading the directions in the book. And you could put sky blue, but you could also put the code that they've got, 90C7E3, semicolon after it. So your nav is going to look like that. If I'm doing the one later on, and I'm skipping around on this, I'm not doing every little step. So I know you want to learn it, but I want to make sure that you're not just imitating me. The one that says H2 element selector, H2 is a vocabulary word in HTML, so it's DT for definition term. So all you do for those is if you're wanting to make an H2, if you're wanting to make an H2 tag, you do the same thing you did for H1, except you call it H2. The same thing you did for H2, except you call it DT. The only time that you use the pound symbol or the dot is if you see the word ID or if you see the word class. Now in the very last one, it says to do styles for a class named resort. See, there's the word class right there. Class is going to indicate, class is going to indicate a dot. So you put the dot right there, and the name of it is called resort. So I'm going to put dot resort, and I put my little braces and put whatever definition is there. Now, if this still is giving you problems understanding this, then you need to come to me personally one-on-one. No, you're not bothering me. That's just the better way for you to learn. It just depends on what kind of security you need personally. Alright, that takes care of the CSS stuff. Now, when you actually use these in your web page, now of course in your website you're going to have the word body. In your website you're going to have the word h1. In your website you're going to have the ID called nav. In your website you're going to have one called resort. So when you're looking at those directions, and again, when I did right here, you got most of your stuff right. When you were doing the word span a minute ago, I don't know why I said a minute ago. When you do the word span, and I want to go to these directions for you also. Let me go back, and this is so hard to do on video, so much easier when it's face to face. And I'm sorry I'm making you dizzy with this. I'm just having to find where I put all the directions. There we go. Yeah. It says in step C, configure a div element named content associated to the ID named content. Now what's confusing you right here, probably Sherry, is we didn't actually make an ID named content. If I were going to make an ID named content in my CSS file, what I would do is I would come in here and I would do something called, because it's an ID, I would do pound content and put my little braces right there. It's an ID named content. Now the reason we haven't created that yet in this exercise is it says right here we'll configure or define colors and all that stuff in the next chapter in the case study. That's what that's talking about, and that's why we haven't actually used it yet. Now it says the opening content div tag should be placed on a line below the closing tag for the nav div. Below the closing tag for the nav div. Alright, if I look at your code, here's your nav right here. There's your nav div. Your closing tag for your nav div is right there. So I want my ID equals content to be below that one. So what I'm going to do is I'll squeeze right here below what I have selected in blue, and I'll type in something that says div, and because it's an ID equals content. Now content and contact are in this exercise, so that's probably what's confusing people. Alright, and it says to put it below the closing tag of nav. Let's go back and look at that again. It says the opening div tag should be placed on the blank line below the closing tag for nav. The closing div tag should be above the closing body tag. The closing tag. Now the closing tag, remember every tag has a name like div, and the closing tag always has a little forward slash in front of it. So when it says closing tag, it's the one that's got that little forward slash in there. Just like body, there's body, and body has a closing tag. That's what closing tag means. So I want to put that closing tag for div below or above the closing body tag. Alright, the closing body tag, if you can see this on the video, is right there. So I want my closing div tag for content, which I've got right here. I want it to be below that. So there's my div ID for content. My closing tag for that will be right above body, so I'm going to put it right here. So I'm going to type \div, and again, that one is above the closing body tag. So there's body right there. So there's my matchup right here. I've got my content, and we'll define it later on, and we'll define that in that CSS sheet that we had earlier. Okay, now you did D pretty closely, more than you realize. In item D, it said find the company name, configure a span that contains this text. Assign the span tag to the resort class. Alright, so what you did correctly right here, you did the span tag. I'm going to put this a little bit higher where hopefully you can see it. You did the span tag perfectly. There it is right there. You did the closing span perfectly. You put Pacific Trails Resort in between them. That's perfect. You don't need it twice because you got it inside. Otherwise it will say Pacific Trails Resort offers. You don't want it to say it 2 times. Now you want to assign it to, and here are the directions again, it says assign that tag to the resort class. Resort class, remember, was defined in that CSS style sheet wherever it is. Yeah, when we did resort right here. So what you have to do right there in your code is to put class equals. Instead of class equals company name, you'll say class equals, and the word will be resort. When you have something in quotes with the div or with the span when it says class equals resort, if you have stuff like class equals resort, or if you have ID equals nav, something like that, you want to have these eventually defined in your CSS style sheet. I hope this helps out, and again, if it still gives you problems, it's probably a mental block or a nerves block, as I said before, and you probably want to come in one-on-one and actually look at it with me face-to-face, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. But you need to make sure you understand this. It's not as hard as you think, but I believe the mental block and the fear is what has you prioritized right now. Probably a little stress there. So I hope this video will help you out.